I realize it's late. I feel like I'd like to be the character in the story of Ulrich Eichenbrecht, who says that the best-loved public speaker of all time began his paper with the words, "Ladies and gentlemen, I will now conclude." But I will begin with another person who likes speaking, Fluellen, from Henry V. And he says, I think it is in Macedon where Alexander is born. I tell you, Captain, if you look in the maps of the world, I warrant you shall find in the comparisons between Macedon and Monmouth that the situations, look you, is both alike. There is a river in Macedon, and there is also, moreover, a river in Monmouth. It is called Wye at Macedon, but it is out of my brains what is the name of the other river. But 'tis all one. 'Tis alike as my fingers is to my fingers, and there is Salmons in both. If you mark Alexander's life well, Harry of Monmouth's life is come after it, indifferent well, for there is figures in all things. Now, in Act 4 of Henry V, Fluellen decides to engage in a bit of comparative history. His hypothesis seems to parody the parallel lives of the sort that Plutarch practiced in his parallel lives of the Greeks and Romans, which had been and would continue to be crucial for Shakespeare's Roman works. He additionally does so with a character, Alexander the Great, whom Plutarch had compared with Julius Caesar. Rather than making us wonder why Alexander should be born, and moreover born only in Macedon, Fluellen's dissertation in comparative history shows Shakespeare poking fun at crude comparisons of the historical philosophical kind, which assume an untroubled identity throughout the ages, while in the process seeming to cast doubt on Plutarch's overriding theme. The situations, look you, is both alike, and there being rivers in Macedon and Monmouth, it stands to reason that it is all one. It is alike as my fingers is to my fingers, and there is Salmons in both. Indeed, we come out of Fluellen's speech indifferent well, for there is figures in all things. Now, different things are often not easily compared, and the suggestion that this moment might be aimed at Plutarch, the comparer of lives, may warm, our historicist hearts, while making us pause in our search for crises comparable to ours in the early modern past. Yet I would like to, once more go into that breach, not really by arguing towards some sort of universality, timelessness, or contemporariness, but simply by mobilizing instead our own contextual experience in a presentist attempt to slightly shift the prism through which we read one aspect in the play Coriolanus, namely the way it shows the political response of the plebeians to usury, dearth, and acute social inequality. Now, you may remember that the opening scene of Coriolanus is unique in Shakespeare's work in that it takes a popular uprising fully seriously and in considerable detail, with a referential force that must certainly have come from the 1607 Midlands Revolt. The people, especially in the first scene, are intelligent, coordinated, and exceptionally class-conscious, something which was sufficiently atypical to have encouraged Bertolt Brecht to adapt the play in the early 1950s. But in Shakespeare's play, the mutinous citizens enter with staves, clubs, and other weapons, and the first citizen immediately tries to rouse the others into killing Marcius, that is, Coriolanus. The discussion that follows is left unresolved as to that proposal, but it is an economic way not only of presenting the citizens' complaints, that is, we will have corn at our own price, but also of showing how acute their consciousness of the relational dimension of their misery is. They say our sufferance is a gain to them, that is, to the patricians. Important also is to notice that up to this point, the citizens represent themselves. Having no appointed representative yet, they speak for themselves and do so eloquently. At one point, Marcius apes some of their complaints. They said they were hungry, cite forth proverbs, that hunger broke stone walls, that dogs must eat, that meat was made for mouths, that the gods sent not corn for the rich man only. With these shreds, they vented their complainings. That Martius calls them proverbs, and especially shreds, shows his irritation with what are in fact effective slogans. And another striking feature is the suggestion in the scene that the citizens have organized themselves horizontally. Although the opening discussion is mostly led by the first and second citizens, no conclusion is reached as to what to do with Martius, and indeed nothing is done to him once he finally enters. Instead, we are told that the other side of the city is risen, and without any mention of leaders, unlike in Plutarch, that is Shakespeare's source, who makes it clear that Junius Brutus and Sicinius Velutus were the first tribunes of the people that were chosen, who had only been the causers and procurers of this sedition. By the time that Martius arrives, the other troop, that is, the citizens from the other side of the city, have disbanded, and their petition has been granted, namely, 5 tribunes to defend their vulgar wisdoms of their own choice, once Junius Brutus, Sicinius Velutus, and I know not. And shortly afterwards, their protests having been heard, the citizens humiliatingly steal away, as the stage direction says. Now, in Bertolt Brecht's unfinished adaptation from the early 1950s, this is a considerable victory. The tribunes chosen by the people immediately begin to act as Leninist vanguard party representatives. That is, they cease to be mere representatives and become leaders. They steer the people along through their hesitations, contradictions, and temporary mistakes in order to come out as victors in a Rome freed of Coriolanus and finally ready to discuss such fundamental matters for the Commonwealth as a proper sewage system. Brecht's rendering, however, involuntarily taps on a major preoccupation nowadays among activist groups, especially those of a more anarchistic bent. As assemblies and encampments sprung up in Syntagma Square, Puerta del Sol, Zuccotti Park, and many other places around the first years of the 2010s, any attempt by actual political parties to take a leading role in the organization of the discussions was always strongly opposed. These vertical hierarchical structure, the vertical hierarchical structure of traditional parties was constantly denounced as a model to be avoided in order to be replaced by an open-ended horizontal forms, mostly tried out during the assemblies themselves. In practical terms, representative democracy was replaced by various forms of direct democracy, so that considerable care was taken to avoid having representatives, and especially representatives who might become leaders. This was to ensure that the assemblies remained the organ of decision, instead of being helplessly directed by elected leaders with freedom to do what they pleased with their mandate. The rationale behind this general move was the feeling that representation in democracy had foundered somewhere along the distance between a variety of electors and candidates already armed with a ready-made program. This was believed to have created a feeling of disempowerment and to have discouraged further political action beyond regularly held elections of uniformly dissatisfying candidates. In this, such movements did effectively distance themselves from the Leninist model of the party, which characterized most political movements during the 20th century. If Brecht's Coriolan, the German title, was an apt representation of the forms of struggle during the first half of the 20th century, a contemporary reading of Coriolanus would need to focus, among other things, on the tragedy of the people's disempowerment through representation. In his recent Arden edition of the play, Peter Holland explains that There has been a tendency among critics to assume that the creation of the tribunate is identified in the play as a beneficial step towards a more substantially democratic procedure. But the process seems to have almost the reverse effect. As we know, the citizens of the first scene of the play never regain their independence and critical thinking. Once the tribunes of the people are chosen, they go from being mere representatives of the people, that is, mere conveyors of their demands, to becoming their actual leaders, so dictating or persuading them to different demands. The citizens' decisions become notoriously shaky, being swayed this way and that by Coriolanus, the patricians, and the tribunes, even though they achieve much more, that is, banishing Coriolanus, than they had before they had acquired representatives. Even here, though, it might be argued that Coriolanus very much functions as the straw man who needs to be banished in order to obscure the fact that the tribunes have failed to address the problem of usury and of undistributed corn reserves. In a contemporary rereading of Coriolanus, we might see how a grassroots movement demanding corn at their own price and an end to legislation supporting usurers gets hijacked by the chosen tribunes, who then focus their indignation on one individual, whom they manage to purge from the system, thereby appearing to heal a diseased community, without, however, appearing to address the citizens' economic demands. And the crucial final moment in such a reading would not be Coriolanus' final demise, but rather the report made by the first messenger to the tribune Sicinius in Act 5, Scene 4. In it, the messenger tells that the plebeians have in the meantime got angry and seized the other tribune and threatened to kill him. He says, "Sir, if you'd save your life, fly to your house. The plebeians have got your fellow tribune and hail him up and down, all swearing, if the Roman ladies bring not comfort home, they'll give him death by inches." And in a recent Portuguese staging of the play, directed by Nuno Cardoso in 2014, after Sicinius heard these terrifying news, the messenger was followed by angry plebeians, assaulting the other tribune, coming up on the stage, in what might well have reminded spectators of an incident in 2010, a collective physical attack on Kostis Hatzidakis, a former Greek Minister of Transport and Development, in December 15, 2010, as he walked from his car to his car from the parliament in the midst of an anti-austerity demonstration. In this spirit, we may then try to reread Coriolanus while aligning it with recent preoccupations regarding the European debt crisis and popular resistance to austerity and neoliberalism in the context of movements such as Occupy, which famously pitched the bottom 99% against the top 1%. And such a reading, Brecht's Leninist interpretation, might nowadays give way to a proto-anarchist tragedy of self-representation as it is replaced by standard democratic representation. In fact, to return to Fluellen forgets the name of the river in Macedon. But there is a river bathing Macedon called Haliakmon. And guess what? There's something that connects it to the river Wye. There is Salmons in both. Thank you.